There is a moment buried in the mathematics of the universe, where every equation humanity has ever written points to the same conclusion: that something is coming, that it has always been coming, and that every star you have ever looked up at in wonder is, right now, a beacon leading it straight to you. This is that moment. Welcome to Beyond Impossible, the channel where humanity does not bow to the incomprehensible, does not negotiate with extinction, and does not go quietly into any dark, however vast. Tonight's story is not about survival in the traditional sense. It is not about weapons or wars or the courage of soldiers on a battlefield. It is about a choice so staggering, so cosmically violent in its implications, that the species which made it will never again look at the night sky the same way. Tonight, humanity faces a predator so immense it feeds on galaxies, and our only answer is to kill every star we have ever known and vanish into a darkness of our own making. This is the story of the Dark Galaxy Protocol, and before this episode ends, you will understand exactly what it cost us to disappear. The signal did not arrive like a warning. It arrived like an obituary. On the 14th of March, 2387, the Deep Horizon Array, a network of quantum-entangled gravitational sensors strung across 40 light-years of interstellar space, registered an anomaly so far outside the boundaries of known physics that the system flagged it as instrumental error 17 times before the failsafes finally surrendered to the data. Dr. Yara Osai, chief astrophysicist aboard the research station Meridian Crest orbiting Europa, was the first human being to read the unfiltered output. She sat with it for 4 hours before she called anyone. Not because she doubted the numbers, because she understood them perfectly, and she needed 4 hours to accept what understanding them meant. What the array had detected was not a signal in the communicative sense, not a transmission, not a pulse, not anything that carried information in a form humanity had previously cataloged. It was an absence, a structured, moving, geometrically precise absence of electromagnetic radiation propagating from a region 11 billion light-years beyond the observable universe's current boundary. Entire galactic clusters, mapped by humanity's most powerful telescopes over centuries of patient observation, were going dark, not dimming, not collapsing into black holes on any timeline consistent with natural stellar evolution. Dark instantaneously, completely, as though something had simply decided they were finished. The pattern had directionality. That was the detail that broke Yara's composure when she finally allowed herself to speak it aloud to the station commander, Admiral Ren Vasquez. The absences were not random. They were sequential, advancing along a vector that, when extrapolated forward through 11 billion light-years of intervening space, terminated with mathematical precision inside the Milky Way's Orion arm, inside the solar system, inside the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Whatever was consuming galaxies knew, in some sense that defied every framework humanity had built to understand intention and intelligence, where to look. Vasquez did not ask Yara if she was certain. A woman who waits 4 hours before speaking is not speaking until she is certain. Instead, he opened a quantum-encrypted channel to the United Earth Directorate and said 4 words that triggered the most classified emergency protocol in human history. Initiate Dark Galaxy Review. Within 6 hours, every major space agency, every deep field observatory, every military and civilian astrophysics institution on 14 colonized worlds was receiving the array data and running their own verification sequences. Within 18 hours, all of them had returned the same answer. Within 24 hours, the Directorate had convened in sealed session on Titan's governmental complex. Dr. Yara Osai, still wearing the same clothes she had been wearing when the data first arrived, stood before the assembled leadership of the human species and explained, in precise and devastating terms, that something was eating the universe, that it was headed here, and that humanity had perhaps 60 years before the leading edge of its approach became detectable by whatever sensory apparatus it used to locate its next meal. 60 years to solve the unsolvable, to do the undoable, to extinguish deliberately and permanently every star humanity had ever called home. The first instinct of every civilization that has ever faced extinction is to fight. It is written into the biological architecture of every creature that has ever survived long enough to become intelligent. The refusal to accept termination, the compulsive reach for a weapon, any weapon, even one that does not yet exist. Humanity was no different. Within 72 hours of the Titan session, 17 separate defense proposals had been submitted to the Directorate's Emergency Science Council, ranging from the theoretically ambitious to the cosmically delusional. There were proposals for a gravitational mirror, a structure of sufficient mass arranged at the galaxy's edge to deflect the entity's trajectory. There were proposals for a directed energy barrier woven from the combined output of 1,000 harvested stars. There was, submitted anonymously and in apparent seriousness, a proposal to attempt communication. Every proposal was modeled. Every model returned the same category of answer, expressed in different units of impossibility. The entity, designated formally as construct null by the Scientific Council, though the crews of the Deep Horizon Array had already begun calling it the Dark, and the name spread the way true names always do, was not moving through space in any manner that responded to the forces humanity knew how to weaponize. It did not interact with gravity in a deflectable way. It did not absorb or reflect directed energy. It did not, as far as any sensor array could determine, have a surface, a boundary, or a physical form in the conventional sense. What it had was a wake, a zone of total electromagnetic extinction that preceded its advance by approximately 2 light-years, and within which no form of radiation, from gamma to radio, survived. Whatever the dark was, it was not a thing that could be reasoned with, aimed at, or stopped by anything humanity could construct in 60 years or 600. The communication proposal was the last to be formally ruled out, and its elimination was the most quietly devastating moment of the Council's first week. Dr. Amara Stein, the xenolinguistics lead who had spent 30 years developing frameworks for first contact scenarios, presented her analysis in 11 minutes. The dark showed no evidence of information processing, no recursive behavioral patterns, no response differentiation based on environmental variables. It was not intelligent in any sense the word had ever been used. It was not hunting. It was not choosing. It was simply advancing, consuming, extinguishing, the way a fire consumes without malice, the way a tide erases without intention. You cannot negotiate with a tide. You cannot make a tide understand that what it is about to erase took 4 billion years to build. What remained, after every offensive and communicative avenue had been exhausted in 72 hours of brutal, sleepless modeling, was a single surviving strategic concept. It had been submitted not by a defense contractor or a military theorist, but by a 29-year-old doctoral candidate in comparative stellar ecology named Jonah Reyes, who had spent his academic career studying how organisms evade apex predators in deep ocean environments where light itself becomes a liability. His proposal was 4 sentences long. If the dark locates targets through electromagnetic emissions, through light, heat, radiation, any signal that announces the presence of energy, then the only viable survival strategy is the elimination of all such signals from the Milky Way simultaneously. Every star, every reactor, every photon humanity has ever generated, total darkness, complete silence. The galaxy goes extinct on purpose before the dark arrives to make it extinct without one. The Council read it 3 times. Then they summoned Jonah Reyes to Titan, and the 60-year clock began counting down toward the most violent act of deliberate self-erasure in the history of any known civilization. The engineering problem at the heart of the Dark Galaxy Protocol was not, as most people initially assumed, a question of power. Humanity had, by the 24th century, developed sufficient technological reach to manipulate stellar processes at a meaningful scale. Dyson partial shells harvesting solar output, magnetospheric injection systems capable of altering a star's convective layer behavior, gravitational lens arrays that could focus or disperse stellar radiation across interstellar distances. The problem was not whether humanity could extinguish a star. The problem was whether humanity could extinguish 400 billion of them simultaneously within a margin of error measured in milliseconds, across a galaxy 100,000 light-years in diameter, in a universe where the speed of light made the word simultaneously a cruel joke dressed up as a physics constant. Commander Vance, appointed director of the Protocol's Engineering Division 18 months into the project, laid the core paradox out for her team on their first morning together, with the kind of clarity that only arrives after a person has spent several sleepless nights making peace with an impossible thing. Any signal transmitted to coordinate the extinction sequence would itself travel at the speed of light. A coordination pulse fired from the galactic core would take 50,000 years to reach the outer rim. By the time the last star on the galaxy's edge received the instruction to go dark, the first stars to comply would have been dark for 50 millennia. A staggered, uneven dimming that would read, to anything sensitive enough to detect the pattern, not as a dead galaxy, but as a galaxy in the process of being deliberately extinguished. Process, a behavior, a signal louder than starlight. The dark, if it responded to any form of patterned electromagnetic change, would be drawn to a dimming Milky Way like a deep-sea predator to a wounded animal's irregular bioluminescence. The solution, when it finally emerged from Jonah Ray's and Vance's joint modeling sessions after 4 years of iterative failure, was not an engineering solution in the traditional sense. It was a physics exploit, a manipulation of quantum entanglement at a scale that had been theorized for centuries, but never attempted beyond laboratory conditions involving particles measured in the dozens. The proposal called for the deployment of a galaxy-spanning entanglement web, a network of quantum-locked relay nodes, each seeded into the chromosphere of a target star, each instantaneously connected to every other node regardless of intervening distance, capable of transmitting a single binary instruction, extinguish, across the full diameter of the Milky Way in 0 seconds. Not light speed, not faster than light. 0. The entanglement web would not send a signal through space. It would change a state everywhere at once. The theoretical framework was sound. The execution nearly killed the program entirely. First full-scale node deployment test, conducted on a cluster of 47 red dwarf stars in the Sculptor Dwarf Galaxy to avoid any detectable signature near the Milky Way, succeeded in establishing entanglement coherence across 31 of the 47 targets before quantum decoherence cascaded through the network and collapsed it in 0.003 seconds. 31 stars flickered, 16 remained lit. The asymmetry was not merely a technical failure. It was a demonstration that a partially executed dark galaxy protocol was more dangerous than no protocol at all. Galaxy that went partially dark, unevenly, in a pattern that suggested biological panic rather than natural stellar death, was the single worst possible signal humanity could broadcast into the approaching void. Jonah Ray sat alone in his research bay for 6 hours after the Sculptor results came in. When Vance found him, he was not despairing. He was deriving. The cascade failure, he told her, had shown them exactly where the decoherence originated. A resonance interference pattern between adjacent nodes caused by the target star's own magnetic field fluctuations, disrupting the entanglement substrate during the injection phase. It was solvable. It would take 11 more years and the resources of 40 colonized worlds to solve it, but it was solvable. He said this with the specific, exhausted certainty of a man who has just watched something break in exactly the way he needed it to break to understand how to make it whole. Looked at him for a long moment, then pulled up the revised deployment timeline on her console. 43 years remaining on the clock, 11 years to fix the resonance problem, 32 years to seed 400 billion stars with a network that had to work perfectly, instantaneously, and exactly once. She approved the revised timeline without a word and went back to work. The resonance problem broke on a Tuesday, which Jonah Rays would later describe as the most ordinary detail of the most extraordinary morning of his life. 11 years, 4 months, and 17 days after the Sculptor cascade failure, a junior engineer named Priya Anand, 26 years old, 18 months out of the Callisto Institute of Quantum Systems, signed to the node calibration team on a rotation that was supposed to last 6 weeks. Noticed something in the decoherence logs that every senior researcher on the program had looked at and looked past for over a decade. Magnetic field fluctuations disrupting the entanglement substrate were not random interference. They were periodic. They followed the natural oscillation cycle of each target star's own magnetospheric breathing, the slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction of a stellar magnetic field driven by convective plasma movement deep within the radiative zone. The nodes were not failing because the stars were unpredictable. They were failing because the nodes were being deployed in rigid clock-fixed intervals that took no account of where each individual star was in its own magnetic breathing cycle at the moment of injection. They were trying to thread a needle in the dark without accounting for the needle's movement. Priya's solution was, in retrospect, elegant to the point of feeling inevitable, the specific quality of genius that only becomes visible after someone has already thought of it. Rather than deploying nodes on a fixed schedule, the entanglement web would be seeded dynamically, each node injection timed to the precise moment its target star reached magnetic field minimum. The brief, shallow trough between oscillation peaks where the chromospheric interference dropped below the decoherence threshold. Every star breathed differently. Every injection would happen at a different moment. But every node, once seated in that window of minimum interference, would lock into the entanglement substrate with full coherence integrity and hold indefinitely, immune to subsequent magnetic fluctuation because the quantum lock, once established at minimum field, self-stabilized against the rising cycle. The web would not be built on a schedule. It would be built on 400 billion individual heartbeats. Jonah read Priya's derivation once, stood up from his console, walked to the observation port of the Meridian Crest, still operational, still his home after 30 years, and looked out at the star field for a long time without speaking. Then he transmitted the derivation to Issel Vance with a single line of accompanying text. "This is it. This is the whole thing." Issel's response came back in 4 minutes. "I know. Begin scaled verification immediately." The verification process consumed 2 years, and the coordinated output of humanity's entire quantum engineering infrastructure across 16 worlds. Scaled tests were conducted on star clusters progressively larger than Sculptor, first hundreds, then thousands, then a full open cluster of 12,000 stars in the Large Magellanic Cloud, selected for its distance and relative obscurity from any vector the dark's approach might favor. The 12,000 star test achieved full entanglement coherence across every target. The extinction pulse, when fired, took 0 seconds to propagate. 12,000 stars, ranging from ancient red giants to young, violent O-class blue supergiants burning at 50,000 degrees Kelvin, went simultaneously, completely, and permanently dark in an event that registered on humanity's sensors as a single unified state change rather than a sequential dimming. The asymmetry that had haunted the program since Sculptor did not appear. There was no pattern, there was no signal. There was only absence, clean and absolute and indistinguishable from natural void. Issel Vance filed her verification report to the Directorate at 300 hours, Titan Standard Time, and attached a single line of operational assessment beneath the technical summary. The web will hold. Begin full galactic seeding. The Directorate approved the transition to Phase 3 within the hour. 29 years remained on the Dark's approach clock. Humanity now had a weapon. Not one that would destroy the Predator, not one that would drive it away, not one that would announce the species' defiance in any form the cosmos could witness or record. Weapon of pure invisibility, built from the heartbeats of 400 billion stars, designed to make an entire galaxy vanish so completely that the thing consuming the universe would pass through where the Milky Way had been and find nothing. Not darkness, not silence, but the specific, unremarkable quality of space that had never, in any way it could detect, been alive. 29 years to seed 400 billion stars. The most ambitious construction project in the history of any civilization began the following morning, before sunrise on every world that had one. The seeding fleet numbered 47,000 vessels at its peak deployment, the largest coordinated armada in human history, repurposed entirely from every deep space construction, mining, and exploration program humanity had running across the galaxy. They worked in silence by protocol mandate, broadcasting nothing beyond the minimum operational telemetry required to prevent collision, communicating through tight-beam quantum-encrypted channels that left no electromagnetic footprint visible beyond a radius of 10 kilometers. They moved through the galaxy like surgeons, not soldiers, precise, methodical, unhurried in the way that only people working against a clock they cannot afford to acknowledge can manage to appear unhurried. Each vessel carried a payload of entanglement nodes calibrated to the magnetic breathing cycles of its assigned stellar targets, and each crew understood, with the particular clarity that comes from having no alternative understanding available, that the nodes they were planting would eventually extinguish the stars they were orbiting, the stars that warmed their hull plating, the stars their children's children had been born beneath. They planted them anyway, because the alternative was not darkness of their own choosing, but the absolute, irreversible darkness of something that would not even notice what it had consumed. 22 years into the seeding operation, with roughly 60% of the galaxy's stellar population successfully knotted into the entanglement web, the Dark's approach vector shifted. It was Yara Osai, older now, her hair entirely white, her hands steady in the way of a person who has spent decades making peace with catastrophic variables, who detected the shift first, as she had detected everything first. The structured electromagnetic absence that marked the Dark's leading wake had altered its propagation angle by 0.0003 degrees relative to its previously calculated trajectory. A number so small it would have been dismissed as measurement noise in any other context. In this context, it meant that the Dark's new vector, when extrapolated forward, no longer terminated inside the Orion arm. It terminated at the galactic core. It was not moving away from the Milky Way. It was moving toward the densest concentration of stellar mass in the galaxy. 4 million solar masses compressed into the accretion disk surrounding Sagittarius A, the supermassive black hole at humanity's Galactic Center, blazing with the concentrated electromagnetic output of 10,000 stars orbiting in lethal proximity to a singularity. If the Dark was drawn by electromagnetic intensity, by the sheer luminous weight of mass stellar radiation, then the galactic core was not merely a destination. It was a dinner bell. The seeding fleet had not yet reached the core. The innermost stellar populations, the densest, most radiation-saturated, most operationally dangerous region of the entire galaxy, had been scheduled for the final phase of deployment, 18 months from the current date, 18 months that humanity no longer had. The revised approach timeline, modeled by Yara's team in the 6 hours following the vector shift detection, placed the Dark's leading wake at Sagittarius A in 11 months. 7 months before the core could be seeded. 7 months before the brightest, loudest, most electromagnetically violent region of the Milky Way could be silenced. 7 months during which the galactic core would continue to burn at full intensity, broadcasting its location across the cosmos with the enthusiasm of something that did not know it was being hunted. Missile Vance convened the Emergency Operations Council within 2 hours of receiving Yara's report. The problem was not engineering. The nodes existed, the fleet existed, the calibration protocols existed. The problem was geometry and radiation. The inner parsec of the galactic core subjected any vessel attempting to operate within it to gamma-ray flux levels, relativistic frame drag effects from Sagittarius A's rotational spacetime distortion, and tidal gravitational shear forces that exceeded the structural tolerances of every ship in the seeding fleet by a factor that made the word exceed feel inadequate. No vessel designed for node deployment could survive long enough in the core environment to complete even a fraction of the required seeding runs. The fleet had been built for the galaxy's quieter neighborhoods. The core was not a quiet neighborhood. The core was where physics went to become something else entirely. Jonah Reyes, 61 years old, sat at the council table, and listened to every engineering assessment confirm the same conclusion. And he pulled up the specification files for the fleet's 12 heaviest deep-core mining vessels, ships built for operations inside the magnetospheres of neutron stars. Their hulls layered with ablative radiation shielding, rated for environments that would reduce a standard vessel to vapor in seconds. They had not been part of the seeding fleet. They had been considered too slow, too unwieldy, too operationally limited for the precision work of node deployment. He looked at the specifications for a long time, running numbers that aged him visibly in the span of 20 minutes, and then he looked up at Issel and said quietly that he would need volunteers. Crews, volunteers, because what he was proposing was not a mission with acceptable risk parameters. It was a mission with the specific kind of risk parameters that a person agrees to only when they have decided that the thing they are protecting is worth more than the certainty of their own return. Issel Vance looked back at him across the council table, and in her eyes was the expression of a person who has known for a very long time that this moment was coming, and has spent that time deciding how to meet it. She said she would lead the first run herself. Jonah told her he would be on the second. The council did not argue with either of them, because there was nothing left to argue with, only 11 months, a burning galactic core, and 12 ships that might, if the physics cooperated and the crews held, be enough to silence the loudest place in the galaxy before the dark arrived to hear it. Issel Vance's vessel, the Absalom, entered the inner parsec of the galactic core on a Thursday morning, Titan Standard Time, which meant nothing to anyone anymore because time had ceased to be a calendar and become a countdown. The gamma-ray flux hit the hull within 30 seconds of crossing the threshold, not as an abstraction on a sensor readout, but as a physical presence, a pressure, a constant roaring assault on every system the ship's radiation shielding was designed to absorb, and every system it was not. A relativistic frame drag from Sagittarius A's rotational distortion of spacetime bent the Absalom's navigational geometry in ways that required continuous manual correction, the ship's trajectory curving subtly, but insistently toward the singularity the way a river's current curves toward a drain, patient and absolute, and entirely indifferent to the vessel fighting it. Issel flew the first seeding run herself, her hands on manual override, because the automated systems could not compensate for frame drag distortion at this proximity fast enough to maintain node deployment precision. He completed 47 stellar injections in the first run. The mission profile called for 11,000. She brought the Absalom out of the inner parsec with her secondary shielding at 12% integrity and her crew intact, which she logged in her operational report as an acceptable outcome, and immediately began planning the second run. The 12 deep core vessels worked in rotating cycles over the following 9 months. In, deploy, out, repair, in again. Each run shorter than the mission profile demanded and longer than the engineering tolerances comfortably permitted. They lost the Caro on the 43rd run, a catastrophic shielding failure at a distance of 0.3 light-years from Sagittarius A, that the crew had approximately 4 seconds to register before the gamma-ray flux reached their unshielded reactor core. Issel heard the telemetry cut out and held the Absalom steady on her current deployment vector for the 11 additional seconds required to seat the node she was planting, because the Caro's crew had not died so that she could pull back 11 seconds short of the work they had all come here to do. And she brought the Absalom out, filed the loss report, and returned to the planning console. There were names in that report that she carried differently after she filed it, not as weight exactly, but as a specific kind of clarity, the way a debt that cannot be repaid reshapes the debtor's relationship with every subsequent decision. Jonah Reyes completed the final core seeding run on the 291st day of the operation, in a vessel called the Meridian's End, named, at his quiet request, for the station where Yara Osa had first read the data that started all of this. Seeded the last node into the chromosphere of an ancient yellow-white subgiant star orbiting at 0.8 light-years from the Galactic Center, and felt the quantum lock confirm in his console readout. And then he sat in silence for a moment that he would never adequately describe to anyone afterward. because there are no words in any human language for the sensation of completing an act that makes an entire galaxy ready to die on command. He transmitted a single word to Issel's vessel. Done. She transmitted back a single word. Home. The surviving 10 vessels of the Deep Core fleet began their extraction burn, and behind them 400 billion stars sat threaded into a web of quantum entanglement, waiting for one signal, ready to vanish in 0 seconds. The dark sleeting wake reached the outer boundary of the Milky Way's stellar halo 31 days later, 19 days ahead of the revised timeline, because the universe had never once in human history agreed to be convenient. Yara Osai, monitoring from the Deep Horizon Array's successor station, watched the electromagnetic extinction front advance on her displays, and calculated that they had between 6 and 9 hours before it reached sufficient proximity to detect the galaxy's full stellar output. He transmitted the observation to the Directorate with a recommended action timestamp. The Directorate deliberated for 4 minutes, the shortest deliberation in the body's history, and authorized the extinction pulse. Yara looked at the authorization confirmation on her screen for a moment, then looked out through the station's viewport at the star field beyond, at the light of 400 billion suns burning across 100,000 light-years of home. And she said nothing, because everything that could be said about what was about to happen had already been said. Across 31 years of work and sacrifice, and the particular human stubbornness that refuses to accept that the universe gets to decide when a species is finished. She fired the pulse. 0 seconds later, the Milky Way went dark. Every star, from the blue supergiants blazing at the galaxy's star-forming arms to the ancient red dwarfs, drifting cold and patient in the outer halo. From the dense stellar populations of the core's inner parsec to the loneliest suns burning in the galactic void between spiral arms, extinguished simultaneously. Completely, in a silence so absolute that the Deep Horizon sensors registered it not as an event, but as the absence of all events. The galaxy did not dim. It did not flicker. It simply ceased to be luminous in a single instant that contained no before and no after, only the clean, unanimous dark of 400 billion stars choosing, through the hands and minds and sacrifice of one small species, to disappear. The dark sleeting wake passed through the coordinates of the Milky Way over the following 11 days. Yara watched it on her displays, the structured electromagnetic absence moving through a region of space that her sensors confirmed was equally absent of everything the dark might use to locate a target. 2 dead voids passing through each other in the deep between galaxies, indistinguishable from the natural dark of intergalactic space. On the 12th day, the wake's far edge cleared the galaxy's outer boundary and continued on its original vector into the space beyond, its trajectory unaltered, its advance unbroken, carrying no indication in any detectable parameter that it had noticed anything worth stopping for. It had not noticed them. The galaxy had vanished, and the dark had passed through the place where it had been, and humanity, living now in the cold, lightless interiors of generation ships and subsurface habitats and deep space stations running on the last reserves of stored stellar energy, was alive. Diminished, shivering in a dark of their own making, but alive. In the centuries that followed, humanity did not immediately rekindle the stars. The quantum entanglement web was designed for extinction, not restoration, and the process of reigniting stellar cores across 400 billion systems would take longer than the protocol itself had required to build. But the species had survived the unsurvivable, and survival, it turned out, was sufficient foundation for everything else. New sciences were born in the dark, physics frameworks developed in the total absence of stellar radiation that would eventually make the reignition possible, engineering disciplines that had never existed because starlight had always been assumed and now had to be replaced. Civilization that had gone dark was not the same civilization that would eventually bring the light back. It was older, quieter, and possessed of a knowledge that no species had ever carried before, the knowledge of what it costs to love something enough to extinguish it, and the patience to wait in the dark until it is safe to make it burn again. There is a question that philosophers and scientists and ordinary people sitting alone with the night sky have asked in every language humanity has ever spoken. What would we do, truly do, if the universe itself came for us? Not a war we could fight, not a storm we could weather, not an enemy we could outwit with weapons or walls or the accumulated brilliance of our technology. What would we do if the only answer was to become nothing? To erase every sign that we had ever existed, to kill our own stars, to step willingly into a dark so complete that even the predator-consuming galaxies would look where we had been and find no evidence that anything had ever dared to live there. We would do it. We would do it with the hands of a 26-year-old engineer who noticed what everyone else had looked past. We would do it with the courage of commanders who flew into the heart of a dying galaxy because someone had to, and they had decided that someone would be them. We would do it with the grief of scientists who fired a pulse that extinguished 400 billion suns and called it survival and meant it. We would do it because that is what humanity does with the impossible, not conquer it cleanly, not defeat it heroically, not emerge from it unchanged and triumphant, but endure it at cost in the dark, for as long as endurance is what survival requires. The Milky Way went dark and the predator passed, and humanity lived on in the cold and the quiet, waiting for the day it would be safe to bring the light back. That day came. It always comes when the species doing the waiting has decided at some foundational level that no external force has ever successfully reached, that it is not finished yet. We are never finished. We are merely, on occasion, invisible, hiding in a darkness we built ourselves, holding our breath in the space between one impossible thing and the next, certain in the way that only a species with our particular history can be certain that the light, when we finally allow it to return, will find us still here. This has been beyond impossible, where humanity does not ask for mercy from the cosmos, does not negotiate the terms of its own existence, and does not, under any circumstance, go quietly. If tonight's story reached something in you, if you felt the weight of 400 billion extinguished stars, and the stubborn, extraordinary species that chose to extinguish them, then you already understand what this channel is about. Subscribe because there are more stories waiting where this one came from, each one built on the same foundational truth, that the universe has never yet encountered anything quite as unreasonably determined to survive as us. We will see you at the edge of the next impossible thing. The dark is not the end. It never was. It was just the shape that hope takes when hope has no other option.